Do you feel a draft about the knees? My goodness, I think we're about to catch a cold.
Oh no, that would be dreadful. I shall call the architect at Maple Grove to shore up this house like Maple Grove, so we'll never catch any colds. No one at Maple Groves ever catches such a shabby genteel thing as a cold.
Welcome to the Two Retired Homeschoolers, our fifth episode. My name is Holly Matthews.
And my name is Rebecca.
My life lesson is if you have a friend who receives a pianoforte from a mysterious source, never under any circumstances inquire or speculate about that source. It will only end in disaster.
And my life lesson is don't be a snob.
Wow, that was really profound. Emma is a sparklingly romantic novel by Jane Austen about a swoon-worthy hero named Mr. Knightley. He sits around in armchairs discussing the weather and grows apples on his farm. Dreamy, right? Emma is the sweet young heroine who's practically perfect in every way except for the fact that she's a raging snob with whom he's long been in love. Amidst the sometimes ridiculous but always interesting folk in their country parish, we watch their story unfold, and in the end, Mr. Knightley gets the girl. By ... criticizing her relentlessly? Love is won and lost, life lessons are learned, and Jane Austen makes fun of absolutely everyone. So, Rebecca, what were your first impressions of this book? I guess this was your second time reading it.
Yeah, but the first time I read it I was probably like 10. That it's really funny.
This is my first time reading Emma. I feel like with almost every book we've done, it's like, oh, this is the something number of times I've read it, and I'm like, oh, this was my first. You're obviously more well-read than me, but...
Or maybe there's selection bias in which books get picked.
Or maybe you just don't have a life, and that's why you read so many books. Did I just say that on a book review podcast? The only Jane Austen I've truly read was Pride and Prejudice.
I see your hipster soul just withering.
Like, why couldn't it have been Mansfield Park or Persuasion or something? But no, it was Pride and Prejudice. And I'd seen, like, Sense and Sensibility, like the movie. So I feel like if you watch the movies, that counts for something, since they do pull a lot directly from the book. But obviously, it's not anything near the same.
Didn't we decide to read this in the first place because you were like, I was like, have you read Emma? And you're like, no, but I know the story. And then I talked about it and you didn't.
Basically. But yeah, I was surprised at how funny it was as well. Also, I was surprised at how well I understood it. I was expecting to have some trouble. To be fair, I had to learn what scruples meant, and I didn't know that pianoforte was like the actual elongated formal way of saying piano. But that's really weird that that's a thing.
It's called pianoforte because originally they had like harpsichords and things like that where you couldn't adjust the dynamic level. The way it was set up, when you hit the key, it would hit something, and no matter how hard or soft you hit it, the hammer would hit the thing that made the sound with the same volume. So you couldn't adjust your volume. But when they invented the pianoforte, you could play piano soft or you could play forte loud based just on your touch on the keys. So they called it the pianoforte because it was such an innovation that you could like change your dynamic level on this instrument.
Huh. Okay. Well, that's good to know.
You're welcome.
Do you want to learn about the 4 forces of flight, Rebecca?
Lift, thrust, weight, and drag.
Yeah, she just learned that from me. Let's not give her too much credit. So let's talk about Emma and snobbery.
Okay.
Emma is
a snob.
Is a snob, but also kind of darling, and you can't hate her. You know what I mean? Like, she's still nice, but she, like, very much has preconceived notions about life that are wrong. She has a moral compass, but it's tainted by her pride. But to be fair, the society she grew up in definitely encouraged that pride. It wasn't as if it was all her imagination, what with the class system and whatnot.
Well, do you think that Jane Austen completely disapproved of Aunt Emma's...
I wanted to talk about this, actually. I felt like Jane was disputing, like, the class system and kind of disparaging it. But at the same time, during that terrible scene...
on Box Hill?
Yes. Mr. Knightley basically brings up, you shouldn't have treated Miss Bates like this. But, like, it would have been probably okay, or at least I wouldn't have objected to it if she were rich. But since she was poor, which why does money have anything to do with that? But it doesn't seem that Jane was like painting that as a flaw in Mr. Knightley necessarily. And then in the very last chapter, when we find out Harriet's heritage and that she marries Mr. Martin. Oh, spoilers, by the way. And then Emma is kind of just like, well, now there needs to be a distance between us, but it's okay because it's happening naturally anyway. And I don't know if that was said specifically in reference to the fact that they were in different class systems.
I think it was said in reference more to the fact that they just weren't suited by nature to be bosom friends.
Perhaps so. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, why would you say that consciously? You know, like that would be something that would just kind of happen.
Yeah, I think
Like a misfortunate thing almost.
Yeah, it was probably both. It's very interesting how critical, even if she's not as critical as we would be, it's very interesting how critical Jane Austen is of the class system in England when she grew up in it. And she didn't grow up lower class. I think she was kind of like upper middle class. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I read like the Wikipedia page on her, but I really didn't gather that much about her.
I mean, I think she was like a gentleman's daughter, but she wasn't rich.
Yeah, that's right. I want to talk about Spark Notes, which if you don't know what it is, it's basically a website that like summarizes a book chapter by chapter. And then I don't love it, but they do like analyses, which usually I don't agree with. But this one I found very interesting, and I wanted to hear your opinion about it. Some critics suggest that Emma regresses, this is at the end of the book, rather than develops at the end of the novel because she exchanges her independence, energy, and wit for a wish to grow more worthy of, this is in quotes, to grow more worthy of him being Mr. Knightley, whose intentions and judgments had been ever so superior to her own, that the lessons of her past folly might teach her humility and circumspection in the future. And then, end quote. Instead of marrying a man who is her equal, Emma marries a father figure, and not only will she not be traveling beyond Highbury, she will not even leave her own father's home. So do you agree that at the end of the book, like, I find that to be good?
Yes, I think her character development is good because it's not as if she's like lost her wit or her quick mind.
It's just that she's growing in wisdom.
She's grown in wisdom and is now able to place the guidance of that under like someone who, not completely, she still answers to her own conscience first, but like she has someone whose opinion she respects, who's going to make sure that she's kind and wise in the way that she uses her wit.
Yeah, it's not like she's giving up independence or even her own wit. It's just
not at all.
Her wit is increasing. It's just guided by.
She's just getting married, and that's how marriage works.
Yeah. See why I don't agree with Spark Notes?
They probably just don't like that now she's not like strong, independent female character enough anymore.
Who doesn't care what the heck a man thinks?
Right, like the fact that she respects his opinion is just not feminist enough, I guess.
Do you feel like on this show we are constantly bashing feminism?
Maybe, but it usually gets edited out.
I feel like we've brought it up almost every episode.
Probably. You know, it's something that's been on my mind recently. Like, I have things that are like interesting to me throughout my life, and then I'll have periods where I'm especially interested in this one particular issue. And just like women's roles, the difference between women and men, how women work in our society, and also women in fiction. Mm-hmm. I don't have a life and read too many books. Is just something that's really been interesting to me for the past while. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why it always gets brought up.
The thing about feminism that just gets me is that they say they're doing everything in the name of equality when really it's just putting women above men, in my opinion.
It depends on what feminist and what brand of feminism, I suppose. I think that, yes, kind of, and also like ceasing to hold women accountable. Mm-hmm. It's like a weird, okay, if you think of like, I don't know, Victorian times or something when women were the like sweet, pure angel of the house, mm-hmm. But they're also like inferior to men in other ways. So they're like better than men, but they're also worse than men because men are the ones who have to do anything involving like strength of character. Because women are just too frail and pure, and we would be destroyed by the evil in the world or something. I don't know. My point being, it's kind of almost like that, where you're like, it's like you think that women are morally better than men, and so you can hold them to this, like, you can put them on a pedestal where you don't have to look at their sins as closely. You don't have to be wary of their flaws because at least they're not men. Men are monsters. Women are at least less monstrous. And they're not.
It has nothing to do with Mr. Knightley being a man. It's just the fact that he happens to have better sense than her. And therefore, it's a good thing that she's, like, looking up to him by the end of the book.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, a good thing that, like, you should admire your spouse. So, like, he also admires her.
Yeah.
So, like, they both look up to each other in different ways. So it's, like, a good marriage. That's what I'm saying. It's just marriage is all.
So what do you think are, like, some of the more admirable qualities in Emma? Because we talked about her snobbery and her tendency to manipulate.
I like that Emma is truly kind. Like, she's not just nice and polite. She's very good at politeness, using it for good and bad purposes. But she's actually kind. Like, she actually cares when she's hurt someone. And she's weirdly humble, even though she's proud. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because, like, imagine messing up the way Emma did and then being confronted about it and then, like, just being like, yep, I was wrong and I'm going to do better now and I'm going to have zero resentment for the person who said that to me. Like, most people aren't that humble.
And the occasion she's bringing up here is when they were having the social gathering, and it's so terrible to rehearse. But basically,
I dreaded it. It happens closer to the end than to the beginning of the book, and the whole time I was reading the book, I was just dreading getting to that scene.
Well, you told me about it, so I was kind of dreading it too.
I'm sorry for doing that to you.
But basically, they were all having a picnic, and Miss Bates is, oh my goodness, the most wonderful character. I love her so much, but she talks far too much. Frank Churchill, who is stupid, he was like, Emma says that you either have to say either one thing clever, two things moderately clever, or three things very dumb. And she promises to laugh at any of them. Of course, Emma didn't really say this. This is just Frank being Frank. And so Miss Bates is like, oh, well, I can certainly say three things dumb. I'm sure, I can't quote this well, but I'm sure that's already happened since I've opened my mouth or whatever. And then Emma is like, yes, but you'll be limited to three. Like, insinuating that, like, yeah, keep a lid on it, you know. And she said this in front of everyone, and it was so embarrassing to Miss Bates. And then Mr. Knightley confronts her about it later. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, because Emma feels the justice of Mr. Knightley's criticism. She feels bad about it, and then she just, like, goes to visit Miss Bates and is nice to her.
Yeah, she cries about it. Then the next day she goes and visits Miss Bates to try to not apologize, but be like, we're good.
And then she, like, the next time she sees Mr. Knightley, she wants him to know that she has mended her ways.
Yes. It's kind of funny. Emma is a bit of a child.
But in a good and a bad way.
In a good way. She's very, like, sure of herself and very much an adult, but it's still just...
Do you think it's funny how she takes an idea into her head and then interprets everything in light of that idea? And then therefore gets really wrong?
Yes. Okay, is manipulation always bad?
My hesitant answer is no, but I'll still get mad if you manipulate me, even for good reasons.
Yeah, Cinema Therapy talked about this actually, which is one of the two media sources that really inspired this podcast, the other one being the book pile. But basically, and I forget which episode it was that they talked about this, but they were saying no, manipulation isn't always bad. Which, okay, I guess, how would you define manipulation? Like, you're not technically taking away someone's choice, but you're influencing it to the point that it's as if you're taking it away. Maybe?
Yeah.
Let's look up the definition of manipulation. Manipulation, the action of manipulating something in a skillful manner. Well, that's helpful. So to the second one, the action of manipulating someone in a clever or unscrupulous way. It's defined as any attempt to sway someone's emotions to get them to act or feel a certain way. That's a very broad term.
That's kind of right, though, right? Like, because someone's not just making a logical choice. You're, like, swaying their emotions to sway their decision. Or, like, clouding their judgment.
Or just advising someone according to your own motivations. I could have, like...
But is that manipulation if you're just advising them with your own motivations, but you're not doing it via playing on their emotions and stuff? You're like, if you're just straight giving someone advice, that's not the same as like seeing how they are, understanding how they'll react, and playing them. The thing I don't like about manipulation, I think, actually is the fact that it doesn't take away someone's choice, but it interferes with that free choice that I think it's very important people be allowed to make.
Wait, like if I had a friend who had a questionable lifestyle and they're like, Holly, I've been thinking about these two different books I've been like thinking about reading, right? And I don't know which one to start on first. One is called Mein Kampf, and the other one is like this random book I found. Apparently, it's like the most best-selling book. It's called like the Bible or something. Anyway, I'm like trying to decide which one to start on, and I'm totally gonna adopt the doctrines of whichever one I start. Using manipulation to sway him towards reading the Bible be a bad thing.
But I sometimes think that things that are bad in themselves can be used toward good ends, right? I mean, I know like the ends don't justify the means, but come on, like you can lie to save someone's life. And lying is wrong, but saving someone's life is more right than lying is wrong. So it justifies lying.
And even the Bible talks about that very specific scenario.
So read the Bible, not Mein Kampf.
There you go. Love triangle morality. This was your category, so.
Great. Okay. So someone basically said something that kind of like made this whole revolution in my head of how I think about Jane Austen. Not completely, but she said that Jane Austen uses love triangles. Like she has a love triangle in like all her books, but she doesn't use them to be like where the heroine or hero has two equally good choices and you just can't decide just for all the like delicious romantic tension or whatever. No, she uses them as ways of illustrating the morality in her story. So, in Pride and Prejudice, the love triangle is Wickham, Darcy, and Lizzie. And so, like, Wickham is the clearly inferior choice. She's not doing it because she's like, Darcy is so cool, but I also love Wickham. Like, which one should I make Lizzie pick? You know, it's like if she picks Wickham, he's like the bad. And if Darcy is like the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very obvious in that one. And so she uses that in all her books. In Emma, it's Knightley.
Frank Churchill.
I will not call him Knightley. I will not be like Mrs. Elton. Mr. Knightley. And Frank Churchill is the love triangle for Emma. And Frank Churchill's not like a Wickham level villain, but he's like the inferior choice.
Yes.
Like it's tied into how the novel like goes with Emma's character growth, that instead of choosing Frank Churchill, she chooses the superior Mr. Knightley. Which I think is really cool.
Is that technically a love triangle, though, or just a person who has two different choices?
Well, it's like she has two potential love interests, and then she goes with the correct one.
Because she didn't even realize she liked Knightley until Harriet started liking Knightley, and by then Frank
it's true.
Out of the picture.
So it's not like, it's not like a traditional love triangle, but it's still kind of, I think it's interesting that in all her books there's the two options.
Yeah.
And I guess in Sense and Sensibility, Eleanor doesn't have two options, and she is the main heroine, but Marianne has two options.
So as far as the morality of it?
Willoughby is a terrible person. And Colonel Brandon, like, Willoughby's, like, dashing and romantic, and so she loves him. But he's a terrible person. Colonel Brandon is older and not as cool, but he's, like, a solid person who, like, values her, and therefore he's a better choice.
Yeah.
I guess that, like, I don't think that Frank Churchill is a bad person either.
Oh, yeah.
And I was getting from you earlier that you had great disdain for him. From the fact that you rolled your eyes.
Perhaps I'm more of a Knightley than I should be.
But, like, do you think he's, like, do you really dislike him?
Okay, are we moving on to...
Is Frank Churchill a bad person?
No, I don't think he's all bad. And I that's one of the things I really appreciate about Jane Austen is she doesn't have just heroes and she doesn't have just villains. Like, it's very much more true to life in that there's a hero and villain in each of us, and some people lean more the other way based off of their decisions.
Some people lean really, really far the other way, like Willoughby and Wickham.
Right. Which there are people in real life who are like villains in that sense. With Frank Churchill, I'm just gonna call him Frank.
Yeah, I noticed you keep calling her Jane.
See, I think the difference between Emma and Frank is that Emma manipulates, but she has good intentions. Even if her intentions are misguided in and of themselves, they're still good. For Frank, it's like he manipulates, but it's not even his intentions. It's just that he's very careless and not thoughtful of other people and the impact that his decisions have.
Yeah,
He's very self-centered and immature. Although he's still a child who has potential to grow up, basically, is kind of what I'm saying.
sure. But don't you think it's still bad that Emma manipulates even with good intentions?
Yes, because her intentions are misguided, but that kind of goes back to is
So is
manipulation.
she therefore justified?
I mean, in this book, definitely not.
But why not? Her intentions were good. She thought her purposes were good. Therefore, she manipulated. She just happened to be mistaken. So, like, her only crime, A, was that her premises were off, but she believed they were right. So, her only crime was being stupid.
Yeah, I wonder, because I wouldn't know how to label that as sin, Like, what would you call it? I guess it's not exactly acting out of love, it's just acting out of her.
It is acting out of pride, not love. You're so correct.
Yeah.
She's acting out of, like, she's, like, arranging everyone's destinies because she knows best and she's best suited to do it.
Do you want to talk more about Jane Austen?
Yeah, I think it's funny how Jane Austen is considered this like romance writer, and everyone's like swooning over Mr. Darcy, and they want to live in like the world of Jane Austen's novels. Not everyone, but a certain subcategory of females.
Right.
And like, I don't know, she's like a romance writer. That's like the whole point of her books. Like, her romances are the romances to which every other romance should aspire. But like, I don't even feel like romance is her main. Even if it's sometimes the main thread of a book, like in Emma, I think that she's just so much more concerned with social interactions and micro relationships, like how the family relates to each other, how the upper class relates to the slightly lower class, how the friends relate. Like, her novels are just more, there's a lot of social commentary in them.
But I think a good illustration of this is she constantly uses very common tropes in romance. Like, for instance, in Pride and Prejudice, the guy and the girl have a love and hate relationship.
Oh, okay.
And Emma, so, like, for instance, Harriet is rescued by, I think it was Frank. No, Knightley? No, Frank from the Gypsies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so in a normal romance story, that would be like, oh, the guy rescues the girl. Now we're in love with him.
Okay.
And Emma, it's like, oh, no. Harriet doesn't fall in love with Frank. She falls in love with Mr. Knightley. Which also I think is so funny that Harriet falls in love with like every male in this book. Not unlike some girls I know.
Except Frank.
Yeah, you're right. That's really funny. So I just feel like she's using all these tropes that are like common today, but they have very different outcomes or very different purposes for the story than they're usually used. And that's like one illustration of how. Yes, they're technically romance novels, I guess, but that's not the feel of them.
Yeah. I think she took joy in that particular subversion. I think she was like, oh, yes, he rescues you from the gypsies. Of course you're going to fall in love with him. And then when she like revealed, because that's what Emma assumes, and then when she reveals that actually, no, I was talking about when Mr. Knightley danced with me when Mr. Elton was like a terrible person, really mean. That's what I was talking about when I was saying the signal service that this gentleman did for me. And I'm pretty sure Jane Austen just like took great joy in like throwing that in the reader's face. Like, ha, you thought it was Frank, it was actually Mr. Knightley, because just because a girl gets rescued from some gypsies by a guy doesn't mean she has to fall in love with him. Suckers.
Yes. Yeah. So because her stories just seem so true to life and how people would actually be, it feels like they're a lot more significant and it like gives them better quality.
Yeah. That's why I hate the Box Hill scene so much, because it is so accurate to real life.
Yeah, and you had talked about that, and at first I was like, I would never say something like that. That's terrible. How could anyone think that that's a thing that actually like happens unless you're like a horrible person? Which I knew Emma is a snob, but she's not like a horrible person. But like later, as I thought about it, I was like, you know what? There have been moments in life I've been very tired and not with it, and just was acting out of my feelings, and I've done like really stupid stuff that I look back on and cringe like so badly on.
You ever said something that was like just like a clever little joke?
Yeah.
And then you're like,
oh, that was
mean.
I don't think I'm clever enough to do that very much, but there have been instances in my life where that has happened.
Yeah. Okay, let's go over and talk about a couple of the characters because they're pretty cool. Or not, as the case may be.
Okay, so Mr. Knightley, what do you think? Because there's so many good things to say about him. What do you think is like his main character flaw?
Character flaw?
Yeah.
What do you mean? He's flawless. I want him to be my husband. Um,
Oh, okay. I got one. Mr. Knightley is weirdly kind of petty, just like the rest of their circle. Like he'll sit there and talk about people behind their back and come up with speculations. And yes, his speculations tend to be correct, but it's still just him speculating about stuff that technically isn't his business.
you don't think you're allowed to talk about other people?
I think you are, but like these are pretty sensitive topics.
Like, what are you talking? Give me an example. I don't remember him
Like
speculating about his
literally
sister
any
Dixon.
conversation between him and Emma about Jane and Frank, or Frank and Harriet, or Harriet and Mr. Elton versus Harriet with
This
Mr.
conversation's always
Martin.
Emma being like, ha ha ha, I think she's secretly in love with this person and Frank and this and blah blah blah. And Mr. Knightley's like, you really shouldn't say stuff like that. I think you gave her distress. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Talk about this kind of thing.
I feel like Mr. Knightley definitely like brought up stuff and like,
Well, he may have, but I don't remember it.
okay. Well, I just found it funny in general how people's main source of entertainment was talking about the other people.
Well, what else are you gonna do in a little town where there's nothing else? I think that I don't have as much of a problem with that as you do. I don't think it's wrong to like talk about, speculate even about people with trusted friends where you know it will go no further. I think it was wrong and a rare lapse in judgment for Emma to say her little speculation about Jane to Frank.
Mhm.
She didn't know that Frank would respect her confidence, and indeed he did not. But the fact that like Jane, Mr. Knightley and Emma, who've been friends since they were born, talk about other people, like that's just what you do in life. You know, you just talk about people and the stuff in your life. And you have friends that it's okay to say those things to.
I would love to agree with you, but how then would you define gossiping?
I just don't think gossiping is always bad. I think there's good and there's like harmless and not harmless gossip.
Okay.
So to me, harmful gossip is when you, maybe if you needlessly indulge in negative gossip about people, that's harmful. And also when you say things, speculations and gossip to people that you don't.
Or when you just betray confidence.
If you betray confidence, yes, that's like the worst type of gossip. But if you're just like talking about people with the wrong kind of people, you should only gossip to like trustworthy people.
Okay. Or like people who form bonds and or feel more connected because they've been talking like badly about other people, or like they have a mutual dislike of this other person.
That's probably unhealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like
Well, and there's a quote I literally hate, and I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said it. It's great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. And I don't know if that's how she meant it, but that is like the snobbiest thing you can say. Like because you happen to have a personality that's interested in ideas above events or people, you're therefore going to look down on people whose chief mental enjoyment comes from thinking and talking about events, or whose chief mental enjoyment comes from thinking and talking about the people that they know. You're just like looking down at them and saying, well, you have a small mind. Like, I hate that. And so to me, there's people whose the joy of conversation is to talk about people. Like, that's just something that they enjoy discussing people the way, I don't know, the way I would enjoy discussing like something weird that I'm interested in. Like, what do I talk a lot about? I don't know. The motivations of book characters. But like, that's what people enjoy. And so to just cut off that whole avenue of conversation and say, nope, if you talk about this at all, it's a sin and you're gossiping and you're a terrible person and you need to mend your ways. It just seems both snobbish and just obviously inaccurate.
well, I would disagree with that like quote to the extent that like relationships are one of the biggest part of what life is about, and relationships are made of people, so of course you're going to discuss people.
Yeah. Like if you are only interested in ideas and never people, your mind is actually probably smaller because
Oh yeah.
technically people are more important than ideas.
Yeah. But then again, if all you're talking about is just the people in your life and you're just always
a small-minded
worried
gossip.
yeah, which is what most of the people in this book are.
Yeah, but they're still nice.
I still love it. It's just kind of sad.
Did I never think of a flaw for Mr. Knightley?
Do you think he's a little too hard on Emma?
I do think he has flaws. I don't know why I can't think of...
Because he says when he proposes to her, he's like, they literally talk about, and he's like, and what of my flaws? I've been like so hard on you and scrutinizing you and criticizing you, and you have borne it as no other woman.
In England would. Yeah.
Which I don't necessarily agree with that. I think all his judgments of Emma were correct.
Yeah, but imagine him saying those perfectly correct judgments to most people. Do you think they would take it as well as Emma did?
That's a good point.
So, yeah. I do think he's flawed. When I finished the book, I was thinking about his flaws, but now I can't remember what they were. I really like Mr. Knightley.
You're just in love with him. Harriet.
Harriet, she's nice. I don't have much to say about her.
Oh, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a Harriet within me for sure. Okay, but Harriet is like that girl who is so, like, yes, she's insecure, but she's not insecure in like a way that's like dishonorable. It's more just like, it's not so much that she doesn't have confidence in her own opinions. It's just that she sets everyone else's opinions up on such a high pedestal.
Yeah, like a stupidly high pedestal. Like she assumes that they're automatically better than her opinions.
Yeah. And therefore she can't really have confidence in her own decisions. And I just love the scene so much where she receives the proposal from Mr. Martin and she's so excited about it. I hate this scene, but I love it because she's like talking to Emma and Emma's like, oh, I won't advise you. I won't. You must be your own judge of your own happiness. And she's just like watching Emma and trying her hardest to figure out what Emma would do and expects. And then she's like, yeah, Emma probably thinks I should reject this proposal. And just based off of her speculation alone, she completely looks past her own feelings and is just like, well, I'm going to do what Emma says because Emma is like this high society girl. And she's also the only person in this situation who is like in a situation where she can really advise me. Because I do think if she had other sources, she probably wouldn't have been so quick to side with Emma.
Everything would have been so much better. I mean, it ended up fine, but if Harriet had just trusted her own decision and been like, yeah, I love Mr. Martin, I'm going to marry him, and then just done it, she would have been happy to begin with.
Yeah, but it's really cool to see her character development and by how at the end of the book she decides to accept his proposal without even telling Emma, and later she's like, I have good news. You might not think it's good news, but it's good news to me. I've accepted his proposal, and Emma's like, thank God. But that's because Emma's also changed. But yeah, I understand Harriet's struggle because if you're so afraid of being wrong, which is why I love that quote that you said your mom said, like, make your own mistakes.
Not someone else's.
Yeah. Like, you have to accept the risk of making a mistake when you make your own decisions. Otherwise, you're not going to make your own decisions. And you'll just, like, with that kind of mindset, you make other people's mistakes, per se, by just always following their advice. And your one solstice is, well, at least, like, it's what this person told me to do. And I guess that just comes from an insecurity and like, or just like an unequivocal fear of mistakes. Like, this says something about me to a degree that it really doesn't. So I like Harriet a lot because I relate to her.
I never thought about her character development before, but I am all of a sudden appreciating it.
All right, Mr. Woodhouse. I adore this character so much. Like, I love Miss Bates, but man, I love Mr. Woodhouse.
Yeah, he's funny.
With Mr. Woodhouse, he's like constantly afraid of the weather and his health. What is the name of the doctor, Mr. Morris?
Mr. Perry.
Or Mr. Perry. They have him over like every day.
Yeah, and he like tries to get people not to eat the cake at the wedding because cake is bad for you.
So I was like, Emma, don't come out, catch a cold
and die.
I promise you'll come over. But as ridiculous and as hilarious as Mr. Woodhouse is, and I think...
Oh, and he's always sad when people get married. He's so sure that they went from a situation of the most wonderful comfort to this terrible situation, like...
Poor Mrs. Weston, poor Isabella. And so as ridiculous as he is and how I think he was intended for this book to be a comedic character, I also don't think he's like so ridiculous that there hasn't been a Mr. Woodhouse that hasn't existed. Like there's definitely people who just are that ridiculous. Miss Bates also in the same way. She just talks on and on and on. But she's so sweet and I love her. I think I just love Miss Bates so much because there's no mystery in her. Like, I love a good mystery, but there's also something really kind of cool about someone where there's like nothing mysterious about them. They're just a complete open book. And also, like, there's not a bad bone in their body or else you would see it because they're just that open.
Mm-hmm.
She's also like unabashedly vulnerable and very brave in her own naive way. And so there are definitely things to be admired about her.
Yeah, she just goes through the world completely candidly, which is super sweet.
She's very, very innocent and always thinking the best of others.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very grateful. And Jane Fairfax, I think you had more thoughts about her than I did.
I don't know if I have a lot of thoughts about her. I just really like her character. It always frustrates me that Emma doesn't want to be friends with her. And maybe something I don't like about Mr. Knightley is that he thinks Jane Fairfax's manners are too reserved. They're not.
Yeah.
Like she's and it really, really frustrates me for people to like write someone off because they're reserved. And there's varying degrees of that. There's people who say, well, they're reserved, therefore they're like a snob who thinks they're better than me and so they won't talk to me.
Yeah.
Which is obviously annoying. And then there's like, they're reserved, so like that's fine, but you know, I'm just going to move on because it's not worth penetrating their reserve to become friends with them, which is valid, I suppose. But I've been friends with people who think that way. And so they, by a funny trick of fate, I'm friends with them, even though under normal circumstances, if they encountered me, I would be one of those people that they're like, this person is too reserved. I'm not going to bother getting to know her.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they did get to know me through no fault of their own and found out that they liked me and that we were friends makes it really irksome to me when they look at other people and they don't bother in that case. It's like you would have written me off the same way and you're writing this person off, and it's fine. You don't have to go be friends with people unless you want to. But I think people underestimate how interesting reserved people can be because they're not willing to just put in the effort to break a little ice. And I feel like Emma and Mr. Knightley both do that, where they dismiss people for being reserved and they overlook all the good in that person simply because that person doesn't put it on display for them. So I really like Jane Fairfax's character because she's a perfectly nice, kind, interesting person. She just happens to be reserved, and so people dismiss her for that. And finally, by the end of the book, justice is done to her, and Emma even wants to be friends with her. And I really, really enjoy that.
Yeah, I loved how the book ended as far as that plot point. Yeah, I appreciated about Jane that she was one of the very few characters, perhaps besides Mr. and Mrs. Weston, who wasn't just like their life revolved around everyone else in the village and what was going on and all the happenings.
Yeah. And I mean, contrast her with Emma. They both have their good points, but like Emma is always saying the wrong things. And versus Jane Fairfax, who because of her reserve doesn't embarrass herself all over the place.
Okay, favorite quotes?
One of them is the one that Mr. Knightley says, better to be without sense, Emma, than to misapply it as you do.
Yeah, that was like my second favorite one.
Sorry for stealing it. Perhaps it was not fair to expect him to feel how very much he was her inferior in talent and all the elegancies of mind. The very want of such a quality might prevent his perception of it. This is me being in charity with Emma being a snob.
So this is from Miss Bates, which really explains her more. I wanted to keep it from Jane's knowledge, but unluckily, I had mentioned it before I was aware.
Something occurred while they were at Hartfield to make Emma want their advice, and, which was still more lucky, she wanted exactly the advice they gave.
Seldom, very seldom, does complete truth belong to any human disclosure. Seldom can it happen that something is not a little disguised or a little mistaken. Especially, have you ever been in a situation where you know so much more about a situation than another person does, but you hear this person talking about it either to you or someone else, and they have very strong opinions, and they only have a fraction of the knowledge you have?
Yep.
And it's like, how are you so confident with so little knowledge?
Okay, thanks for listening to the 5th episode of Two Retired Homeschoolers. Do all the things and follow all the things, and tune in 2 weeks from now for episode 6, The Two Princesses of Bamere by Gail Carson Levine. Can I say that again in a more articulate manner?
What is the word? I'm so tired. Wait, is it this?
It's the stop button.
Okay. We're hopeless, Rebecca.
I know.